Thank you for joining me back for a third video. I believe this is number 3. Thank you for joining me for another video. We'll go with that one. In the last 2 videos, I talked about the first 2 sections of the Tanakh, the Torah, and the Nevi'im, which was really a lot of fun in sort of a mid-morning PBS program sort of way. This week I'm going to finish up the Tanakh. The final section, almost a chapter, the final section of the Tanakh is called the Kethuvim, which literally translates to writings. So without further ado, let's talk about that. So the Kethuvim are the books in the Tanakh that don't fit into the Torah or Nevi'im. And I am going to need my glasses, so I'll just grab them. The word Kethuvim, as I previously mentioned, translates to writings because apparently my ancient brothers were just as creative as I am with naming things, which I discussed actually, I think, in the last video and maybe the video before that. I'm not sure. It's almost as if they were sitting around, at the Sanhedrin, the High Court, and they were like, okay, now that we're canonizing all these books, so we have the Torah and we have the Nevi'im, the prophets, so what should we call these other writings? And somebody was just like, well, maybe let's call them writings for now, and we'll just decide on a better name later. And everyone thought that was a great idea, and for some reason they just never got back around to changing it to a better name. I don't know. Seems reasonable enough to me. Now, the earliest book in the Kethuvim was written well within the prophetic period, so it's going to date us back into the time frame of, let's say, from the death of Moses. Interestingly enough, one of the Psalms in the book of Psalms was actually written by Moses himself. So I guess technically the earliest part of the Kethuvim dates all the way back into the Torah period. The latest, the last book of the Kethuvim is Divrei Hayamim, which is Chronicles, and it was written in the late 5th century BCE, so right about the same time as Malachi was dying. In fact, he, if I remember correctly, was the guy who helped to solidify the place of some of these books in the Jewish canon. Now, with the exception of most of Daniel and parts of the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, the entire Tanakh was written in Hebrew, and that Hebrew is still understandable today to anyone who speaks Hebrew. So it's very much the, I'm not going to say it's the same Hebrew, but it's a similar form of Hebrew to modern Hebrew. Obviously, there are going to be some linguistic changes, especially since the modern Hebrew was actually sort of revitalized, sort of reconstructed, let's say. It wasn't a constructed language by any means, but perhaps reconstructed is a good name for it. If you understand anything about linguistics, you'll get that. Now, the parts of Daniel and Ezra and Nehemiah that are not in Hebrew are in Aramaic. And truth be told, if you can read and understand the Hebrew of the Tanakh, you can actually get by in the Aramaic because they are close enough to each other that it's not really that big of an issue. Now, I'll put my glasses back on. The English names of the books in the Kethuvim as they appear in modern printed versions of the Tanakh are, and I'm just going to read this off of my notes here, Psalms, Proverbs, Job, the Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. Now there are 11 books in the Kethuvim. That brings the total number of books in the Tanakh to 24. Now, if you're comparing the count of the Christian canon and the Jewish canon of the exact same books, you're going to notice we have 24, they have, I think, 39. The reason behind that is because the Christians divided Ezra and Nehemiah into 2 books, which personally, let's be honest, that's a little more logical than just kind of having it one book, but it's not important. And they divided Chronicles into 2 books with the same name. Now you might ask, why? Well, I'm not actually sure, but I understand that they thought that it would actually be easier. But again, I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm not a Christian. They kind of did their own thing for a while. But Jews may only count 24 books in the Tanakh. Now, the content of the books of the Kethuvim cover a very wide range of topics. That's why I'm leaving my reading glasses on. And I'm going to be doing a lot of reading. So this is probably actually going to be a really short video because I'm just going to read a lot of it. Now, the book of Psalms, it's literally a hymnal. It's a book of songs that were written by different authors for use in worship services. Now, it's commonly credited to King David, but there are other authors of the songs in the books. And just kind of a side note, there's a common Christian teaching that Jesus was, or not Jesus, sorry. Man, thinking way outside of... We'll get to him later, I'm sure. King David, there is a common Christian tradition. It's because I said Christian that Jesus popped into my mind. There is a common Christian tradition that King David was a prophet. I think they also think Jesus was a prophet, but that's not important. And that David's Psalms are also prophetic. Now, I'm going to disagree with that, but not for the reason that everyone would think. I'm not disagreeing with it because I'm not a Christian, because I'm a Jew. No, because actually Jewish tradition also says that he was a prophet, and also says that his prophetic inspiration shows up in his Psalms, and I think it does. But I'm going to disagree with the Christian concept that King David was a full-blown prophet because, and I guess also ultimately I'm disagreeing with the Jewish tradition as well, because while I do agree that he did have some measure of prophecy, I think that it was a very low measure of prophecy. And I think that really all his Psalms, that are taken as being prophetic, really are not prophetic. He's just really writing about what he envisions as this ideal future. So there's that. So I'd argue that the tradition is actually a lot more exaggerated than reality, and that the Psalms that he wrote just sort of project his hopes and his prayers, if you will, onto the future more than he's predicting something. Now, what is clear is that there are absolutely no clear prophecies in the book, and by that I mean, he never once says in any of the Psalms, "Thus saith Hashem." In the future it's going to be like XYZ. What he says is, oh, God help me. They're everywhere. The bad guys, my enemies, they're surrounding me. Things like that. And you can certainly see parallels in Israel's national history, even today. Case in point, you look at literally any war that Israel, the modern state of Israel, has fought, and it's literally all the countries around it going after them. So my enemies surround me. Well, of course they do. It's just the location. But that's why I argue that there is some degree of prophetic inspiration in his Psalms, but it's perhaps just exaggerated more than it needs to be, really. Now, the book of Proverbs, as the name suggests, is a collection of proverbs that were said around the same time. Now, Proverbs is credited to King Solomon, that's the son of King David. But there are who also have Proverbs included in the book. So maybe like King Solomon just sort of collected them all and put them in a big book together. I don't know. I wasn't there. But that's how I envision it happening. The book of Job is a wildly unsatisfying book for the majority of the book. That is, unless you like something like 35 chapters or so straight of just arguing about whether or not Job sinned. Now, it addresses the question of why the righteous suffer, but it never actually opens the question, or never actually answers, not opens. It opens that question, but it never really answers it. It's kind of like asking my 6-year-old about something that I know that she did wrong. Like, she'll never give me a straight answer, and she's going to talk about literally everything else along the way, just to never actually answer the question. So there's that. As a father, I can understand the sort of twists and turns of, oh, well, he sinned, but he didn't, but really he did. That kind of a thing. Now, what might be a surprise to Christian or Muslim viewers is that the Satan, the Satan, the Satan, is depicted in the book of Job not as the devil of Christian and Islamic tradition, but as an agent of God sent to test humanity. He's an angel, if you will. Some Christians will argue that, he's a fallen angel, but that's not what the book of Job portrays. It's also not what the book of Zechariah portrays. When it talks to those are the only two times that it actually mentions the Satan, the Satan. He's not a devil, and maybe we'll talk about this in a different video. He's not the devil. He's not a bad guy. He's actually a good guy. He's on our team. And there's a lot that I would have to explain to, make that clear. But he's an agent of God, and he's sent just to test humanity. Now, it's not hard to see why the Christians and Muslims eventually came to see him as the bad guy, but, that's not really important today. Now, the Song of Songs is going to be the closest thing to a romance novel in the Tanakh. It's openly erotic, at least at surface value. It's traditionally interpreted as an allegory for the relationship between God and Israel. Israel is God's wife, and therefore the lover of the book of Song of Songs is perceived as being God. Israel is as the bride of God, is seen as being the beloved in the book of Song of Songs. It is interpreted as an allegory, but I still wouldn't let a teenager read it because, obvious reasons. At least not until they're mature enough. And if it's a guy, he's probably never going to be mature enough because I still kind of chuckle a little bit when I read it. If you, if you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe give that first chapter a read. I don't know. You do you, but I'm not going to tell you. This is the one book of the entire Tanakh that I am not going to tell you that you should read. Because I read it as a 13-year-old and thought it was hysterical, and I'm now 30. I'll be 39 this week, I think. Last week, next week, some week. I'll be 39. I'm almost 40. And it's still funny to read. I still chuckle the whole time. It's because I'm secretly 5 years old, I guess. I don't know. The Book of Ruth, getting back on topic, the Book of Ruth. It's an historical narrative, and it follows the life of a Moabitess named Ruth, who converted and joined Israel. Now, really, it portrays her steadfast faith in the God of Israel and her loyalty to her mother-in-law, and it's all very inspiring. What's really interesting about it, though, is at the end of the book, it actually tells us that Ruth is an ancestress, assuming that's a word. She helped produce King David and the Davidic dynasty, so she's actually an ancestor of King David, according to the book of Ruth. Now, it is possible that somebody later came along and threw that in there just to kind of provide some context, and that it wasn't part of the original book of Ruth. I don't know. I wasn't there. But it seems totally logical, totally reasonable that somebody would have had to have come along later, after King David, to kind of connect the dots. Or I suppose one of these days we'll all figure it out. Now, Lamentations is a book of 5 poems lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem at the hand of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. Now, it's overtly sad, and frankly, that's exactly what I expect from any poem written about the destruction of any city. The melody that's used to sing it in, because we sing whenever we read scripture publicly, we sing it. The melody that's used to read it, it's a very deeply moving dirge, and honestly, the very first time that I remember hearing it, literally from the very first word of it, Echa, I just suddenly was overcome with an intense feeling of grief. I actually cried. I'm actually kind of getting misty-eyed now, because it's terribly sad. It's honestly the saddest part of the Tanakh. Now, that's my opinion, but it's probably also objectively true. Ecclesiastes happens to be my favorite book in the entire Tanakh. I have to throw a little qualifier out there. It's because I'm kind of weird that way. It is a strange one to actually like. It's very likely the most depressing way possible to address the meaning of life, which the author ultimately concludes is fear God and keep the Torah. That is the meaning of life in the author's opinion. Personally, I love it, but it's not everybody's cup of tea, so you do you. But I highly recommend it. I love it. Esther, the book of Esther, is an historical narrative that deals with how a Judean exile went on to become the queen of Persia and save her fellow Judean exiles from destruction. It's a great story. We read about it every Purim, which Purim is next month, I believe. Daniel is an interesting book because it's part historical narrative and part actually prophetic visions. Now, I spoke in my last video about why Daniel is not considered a prophet, why he's not in the Nevi'im, but it all comes down to the fact that he didn't understand all of his visions. And honestly, I don't blame him because those visions are pretty wild, at times. But honestly, he didn't really seem to mind that much because at the end of the book, he just sort of, wanders off and does his own thing, whatever his own thing happened to have been. Ezra Nehemiah is a detailed historical narrative about the return of some of the Judean exiles from Persia coming back to the land of Israel. And when I tell you it's detailed, I need for you to understand. I mean, it is super detailed, like detailed down to the names of literally everyone who came and a good group of people who could not go for whatever reason. It literally lists everybody and tells you exactly what they did once they got back. So if you're into like really detailed oriented stuff like that, it's a great book to read. It's a great book otherwise, but it's not everyone's preferred form of reading, let's say. The Book of Chronicles. Now, it's basically a retelling of Israelite history, and it does differ a little bit from the version that's told in the Book of Kings. But the reason that it does so, and it does so in obvious ways, the reason that it does that is to teach a different understanding of the narrative. So, for example, in one of the books, I can't remember which one, it tells us that the Satan inspired David to conduct a census of the Israelite nation, and that was a sin. Well, the parallel account in the other book, and again, I can't remember if one is Kings and which one is Kings and which one is Chronicles. But in the other one, it says no, God inspired him to do it. Well, which one? Is it God or is it Satan? Well, I mean, if you understand that the Satan is just an agent of God, as Judaism does, it makes perfect sense because they're both saying the exact same thing. Now, if you happen to be a Christian or Muslim, you're going to be like, oh, he sinned. It was very bad. He should not have done it. Satan should never have gotten him to do it. He should have resisted the devil, that sort of thing. But, then they're going to come to the passage where it says God said to do it, and they're going to be like, well, clearly it happened twice. It didn't. Well, he may have had a census more than once, but the story that we're talking about here only happened once. Now, also in the book of Chronicles is a genealogy. I love genealogies. They're great because they actually give you a lot of important information that you otherwise would not get, but most people don't understand that, and so they're going to come to a genealogy and they're going to be like, oh, great, and Adam was the father of Seth, who was the father of Canaan, and and so on and so on and so on. And it just seems, for a lot of people, it's very long, very boring. But for me, I understand what's in it. I understand what they're saying. So it all makes sense to me. But that particular genealogy goes all the way back to Adam and follows the course of the history of Israel and Judah up until the edict by King Cyrus, who was the Persian king, this is Cyrus the Great, that allowed the Judean exiles to return home and rebuild the temple at Jerusalem, the Jewish temple at Jerusalem. Whew. Okay, that's it. That's it. I'm done with this video. Next week, I'm going to go over the next period of Jewish Torah literature, which is called the Mishnah. So thank you for joining me today. If you haven't yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit that like button for this video if you enjoyed it. If you haven't already done this, go ahead and turn on the notifications for my channel so that every time I put out a new video, you get an alert just letting you know what's going on. If you're on Facebook, don't forget to swing by my Facebook, An Unorthodox Jew, and go ahead and like and or follow that. Feel free to share this video and any of my content on the social media platform of your choice. If you have questions, I have answers. They might not always be the right answers, might not always be the answers that you want to hear, but I have answers. And I would love to talk about them. So if you have questions, you can ask me either in the comments for the videos, or you can go to Facebook and drop me a DM or whatever we're calling it now. Send me a message, leave me a comment on the video. Just ask your question. Any sincere question I will address. If you're just making trouble and I can tell that you're just making trouble, then I'm just going to block you or something. I don't know. Anyway, that's all I got. Thank you for joining me again this week, and we'll see you next time.